28th?
Same Hebrew English, isn't it?
Yeah. No,
26.
26.
Yeah, yes.
26. Okay, so today's the 26th of Tevis, the 26th of January. And we are in Mitzvahs Kiddush HaChodesh, and Derech Mitzvah Secha, Samech Tet Amud Bet, page 138. So last time we talked about the sun, the earth, and the moon as being a very good analogy to everything that we spoke about. The moon being the Nukva, Malchus, the earth being Za, and the sun being the Abba, the father. And it's a good way to envision this whole relationship. So now we said that on Rosh Chodesh, the Malchus goes up to receive from Abba directly. It receives from the Moichin, from the mind, directly without the intervention of the Za, of its husband. And then it says, Ve'az nimshach mochin chadashim benukva. And then, when that happens, then it's called new mindset in the feminine. And as opposed to during the middle of the on Shabbos and during the middle of the month, where it's not called new mind, even though it could be technically that it's new, but it's not new because it passes through Za, through the husband, through the small countenance. And now he says there's ways of seeing this in the way that a person is speaking, because we said that the Malchus is speech, is the way we speak. So the same thing is true about speech, as it receives from supernal wisdom without first being enclosed in the midos, in the Za. And then the speech, you hear it at more nullification, more of a sense of nullification. How do you see nullification? How can you judge if a person is nullifying himself or not? So first of all, you have to say that this is the crux of what the Baal Shem Tov taught to all his disciples. It's called Achna'av Dalam Taka, which we translate usually as submission, separation, and sweetening. The Baal Shem Tov taught this because he said to his disciples who would become Rebbes, each one would become a Rebbe himself, says, as much as you know, in order to lead a community, you have to nullify yourself out of the equation. Meaning they're coming to listen to you, they want to hear you. But if you can't nullify, if you can't subtract yourself as the intermediary between the speech and the mind, meaning what are you? You're the Za in the middle. You're like the Midos in the middle. You have a lot of yeshut. You have a lot of sense of self. So even though you learned something, and that something that you learned certainly didn't come from your whims, it came from Torah. You learned it from Torah. And now you're going to say it to others. So he says, even though you received it from Torah, it's not a guarantee that when you say it, you're not going to mix yourself into it. You bring your ego into what you're saying. It's very hard not to. So he taught them a method that was one of his main teachings, and it was one that made probably the most impression in many ways. That a Rebbe has to, and now today everybody's a Rebbe, so everybody has to learn how to do this. Achna'av dalam taka, submission, separation, and sweetening, in order to be able to speak. And the reason that he connected this all to speech is because he connected this to the mysterious word in Ezekiel, chashmal. Chashmal literally means some kind of light, some kind of aura. But the way that it's divided by the sages is into a composite word, chash and mal. Chash is to be silent, and mal is to speak. So they say these are the angels, fiery angels, or living angels, who sometimes are silent and sometimes speak. So from this he learned that there's actually three stages, and he calls them chash, mal, mal, because the word mal, he says, has two meanings. It can be either mal, to speak, or actually another meaning is mal, to cut off, like milah, like milah, circumcision. So he says it's chash, mal, mal. So first you have to be silent, then you have to cut off, and then you can sweeten, which means to speak. So he says before speaking you have to first of all be silent, and then cut off. What's that talking about? To explain that that's talking about your ego. That you have to, first of all, even though you learn something and you want to say something, he says, the first thing is that you have to be silent. You're dying to say something. First of all, you have to be silent. It's not just silence in the sense of not speaking. It's in the sense of I have nothing to say. It's like even as much as I've learned, I clean myself out as if I have nothing to say. Then, when there's nothing for me to say, I don't have an urge, an impetus to really go and speak. That's called submitting the ego, meaning you're stepping on it, as it were. You're holding it down, pressing it down, and then you cut it out. And when you cut it out, what it means is, you can call it cutting out, and the other option is you can say that you only identify, you only connect to the Torah that you learned. Meaning, after you remove it from yourself, and you remove the ego from it, now you can get it back in a pure sense. Yes. And then you can speak. So that's on one foot, submission, separation, sweeting. So the same thing he says here, that if the nukva, the power of speech, is not receiving from the midos, from the emotions of the heart, that's where the yeshut, that's where the ego is, then it's called that he's speaking with a sense of nullification. So how do you judge this? Says the Baal Shem Tov. How can you know? So he says, "Siftei kohen yishmeru da'at v'torah yivkshu mipiu," that the lips of the kohen, of a priest, will guard knowledge, and then Torah they will demand from him. So what does this verse mean? It's from Malachi at the very end of Malachi. So he says what it means. Everybody understands this. It means that if the Gemara says if the rabbi is like a Malach Hashem Tzvakot, if the rabbi is like an angel, Siftei kohen yishmeru da'at ki Malach Hashem Tzvakotu v'torah yivkshu mipiu. That's the full verse. I left out the middle part. So the lips of the Kohen guard da'at because he is like the angel of God, and then Torah they will demand from him. So it says, so if the rabbi is like an angel of God, then you should ask him for Torah. But if he's not, don't ask him for Torah. So he says about himself, I don't know what an angel looks like. Most people don't know, so how do you? So he says, you take the word angel, malach, and you permute it, you get ke'ilem. Ke'ilem is like a mute, like a person who can't speak. A mute, not a mute. Sorry. No, like a mute. So if he's like someone who can't speak, then demand Torah from him. Meaning you ask him a question, and first of all, he's silent. So he says, what do you mean? Maybe in the past this was done naturally. But today, I have to teach you how to do this. So the idea here is that when you're silent, and that's exactly the idea, that the moon is now right next to the sun. It's not, so you can't see it. So in a sense, the moon is mute. It's not giving off its light. That's what happens at the beginning of the month. Then that is called new mind. What do we mean by new mind? Now we mean that this is like a new teaching from Hashem. Otherwise, it's same old, same old. It's still his ego speaking. So on the first of the month, the new moon is a new mindset. That's the way to understand it, because there's bittul in it. There's self-nullification in it. And self-nullification, we said, is that the moon can't be seen. You don't see it. So it's still there. That's the silence before the speech. Okay? That's in the same way. So he has self-nullification. And so when speech receives directly from Abba, from the mind, from the wisdom, then it receives also the sense of nullification, and that's what you see. So he says there's another saying in Koheles, this one's in Ecclesiastes 9:17, that the words of the wise, they're heard benachat. They're composed. Meaning you don't hear the excitement. What do you mean by excitement? Because most of the banter, most of the speech in the world, like we said on Friday, is people expressing their feelings, their emotions. They're working through them. That's why you can't listen to the media, because the media is the worst. All you have there is a group of people who are literally like a bunch of school children who only can express their feelings. They can't say anything that comes from the mind. And if there's sometimes something that comes from the mind, it'll immediately be drowned out by the other emotions that are in, and if you get a group, it's even worse. Okay. So you can't listen to that because it's not coming from wisdom. בנחת ובקרירות בביטול מציאותו ולא כשהוא בבחינת יש. And this is called being a nachat, composed. And קרירות, it's even cold. Why is it cold? We don't mean that it's cold, it doesn't have insight. It doesn't. We mean that the emotions are not bubbling up and creating the words. בביטול מציאותו, in the nullification of his own existence. It's like the person who's speaking is just a conduit. He's not giving off his ego. He's not trying to express himself. ולא כשהוא בבחינת יש. And not when he is a sense of self. That's what he feels. And another example now he gives us. So this would be talking about in general psychologically. But Avodat Hashem, what is this in the avoda of Hashem, in serving God? Hu ha'esek bidvar Hashem zu halacha. This is what we say, that the word of Hashem, okay, is halacha.